This video contains discussions of child abuse. Viewer discretion advised.
Hey, shake it.
Every parent makes a choice each morning. Trust the people closest to them with their most precious gift, their child. But what happens when that trust becomes a weapon? A mother went to work, leaving her 2-year-old with someone she trusted. That decision changed everything. On October 27, 2025, Bre'Yeon Wells was found unresponsive in St. Louis's Mark Twain neighborhood. He was just 2 years old. We are here to seek justice for those who cannot speak for themselves. At True Crime Buff HQ, we don't just tell stories. We fight for the voiceless, the vulnerable, and the victims who deserve answers. Because somewhere in America right now, another predator is earning the trust of families. And if we don't understand how they operate, how can we stop them? Today, we explore how predators exploit the very relationships designed to protect our children. We'll dive deep into the psychology of someone who was family adjacent. A 21-year-old man who knew Bre'Yeon's mother, someone who seemed safe enough to leave a toddler with. But this isn't just about one case in St. Louis. This is about patterns that exist everywhere, and the trust that can become a death sentence when placed in the wrong hands. Bre'Yeon Wells deserved to grow up. He deserved the trust he placed in the adults around him. His story deserves to be told, not as entertainment but as justice. Let's find out what really happened on October 27th, and why the system failed a 2-year-old child who could only depend on the people around him. This is True Crime Buff HQ. Let's seek justice for Bre'Yeon. Bre'Yeon Wells was just 2 years old. At 2, his world was simple. Toys that lit up when he touched them, bedtime stories that made him giggle, and the absolute trust that the adults around him would keep him safe. He was part of a community where 70% of homes are owner-occupied, where families have lived for generations, where neighbors waved to each other on porches lined with early 20th century brick bungalows. This was supposed to be a place where children could play safely. The Mark Twain neighborhood in St. Louis looks like many working-class communities across America. With about 2,600 residents and a median household income of just over $32,000, it's a place where families work hard and try to make ends meet. But here's what the statistics don't show you. This neighborhood experiences violent crime rates over 400% higher than the national average. While recent reports show crime has decreased by 49%, the reality is that parents here already know they have to be extra careful about who they trust with their children. In a community where 30% of children live in poverty, where every dollar matters and childcare options are limited, parents often have to make difficult choices about who can watch their kids. This is where Bre'Yeon's story becomes tragically predictable. His mother knew Nico Cotton, a 21-year-old man who was part of her social circle, someone she trusted enough to leave her toddler with. In communities like this, where childcare is expensive and options are limited, families often rely on extended networks. Cousins, friends, neighbors, people they've known for years. Someone who's like family becomes a natural choice for emergency childcare. The mother wasn't being careless, she was being practical. She was using the same trust network that has kept families safe for generations. But predators count on this very trust, this very community connection, to gain access to our most vulnerable. Here's what psychology tells us about family childcare decisions. When resources are limited, families prioritize familiarity over formal vetting. A known face feels safer than a stranger, even if that stranger has credentials. In neighborhoods like Mark Twain, where only 7% of families have children and community engagement is often low, parents become isolated in their childcare decisions. They rely on who they know, who their friends know, who seems respectable and trustworthy. This isn't about poor parenting. It's about systemic challenges that force parents into impossible situations. When you can't afford professional childcare, when family members are working multiple jobs, when your community doesn't have robust support systems, You make decisions based on the limited options available. On October 27, 2025, those limited options, that trusted connection, and a mother's need to work would converge in the most tragic way possible. Bre'Yeon Wells went to sleep in a world that was supposed to protect him, surrounded by people who were supposed to care for him. But somewhere between trust and betrayal, between community and isolation, between love and violence, a 2-year-old child lost his life. Let's walk through exactly what happened that night and why the system failed him at every step. My dear friend, before we continue this investigation into Bre'Yeon Wells' death, I need your help. This documentary series exists for one purpose: to prevent other children from suffering the same fate. Please hit the like button, subscribe to True Crime Buff HQ, and share this investigation. Every single share reaches more people who might recognize these warning signs and save a child's life. In the comments, write your city and viewing time. This helps me understand when it's best to publish similar investigations so they reach the maximum number of people and can save children's lives. My channel brings you stories about children who needed protection but didn't get it. Each investigation isn't just about tragedy. It's a lesson in recognizing dangerous situations and understanding how predators exploit trust within families and communities. Be sure to watch other videos on the channel because knowing about cases like these could one day help you notice warning signs and protect a child who's in danger. If this mission resonates with you, consider supporting the work through Super Thanks or joining our membership community. Your support allows me to continue documenting these cases, analyzing the evidence, and building resources that communities can use to protect their most vulnerable members. Thank you for being part of the solution. October 27, 2025. The next 72 hours would determine whether justice would be served for a 2-year-old child who could no longer speak for himself. Every hour mattered. Every detail mattered. Because in child homicide cases, evidence fades fast, memories shift, and the window for breakthrough investigation closes quickly. Here's what we know about that day in the Mark Twain neighborhood. A 2-year-old boy was left in the care of someone his mother trusted. A 21-year-old man connected to the family. This was a typical Sunday evening in a working-class neighborhood, where parents often rely on informal childcare arrangements. What we don't know is the exact sequence of events during the afternoon and early evening, but we know this. Around 10:40 p.m., police received an emergency call about an unresponsive child near the 4900 block of Thekla and Interstate 70. This wasn't a gradual decline, this was a crisis moment. EMS responded immediately, rushing the child to the hospital, but it was too late. Bre'Yeon Wells was pronounced dead at the hospital that night. When police arrived on scene, they saw what appeared to be a medical emergency. A 2-year-old child, unresponsive, needing immediate medical attention. But the investigation protocol for any child death is different, especially when the circumstances suggest something more than an accident. The St. Louis Child Abuse Unit took the lead initially, as they do with all child deaths, because while it might look like a medical emergency, the possibility of abuse or homicide must be ruled out immediately. The first 24 hours are critical for preserving evidence, interviewing witnesses, and establishing a timeline. But when you're dealing with a 2-year-old victim, the investigation becomes exponentially more complex. No first-hand testimony, limited physical evidence, and the immediate pressure to determine whether this was a tragic accident or a deliberate act of violence. October 29th, 48 hours after Bre'Yeon's death. The medical examiner's preliminary findings were complete. This wasn't a medical emergency. This wasn't an accident. The cause of death: homicide. The physical evidence painted a horrific picture: strangulation, plus other traumatic injuries. A 2-year-old child had been subjected to violence so severe that it led to his death. This transformed the case from a medical mystery into a murder investigation. The homicide division immediately took over. Child abuse detectives, who had been investigating for 2 days, were joined by murder specialists. 2 adults who had been with the child were questioned and released pending further investigation. meaning the investigation was far from over. Here's what investigators see versus what really happened. They see a 2-year-old child with obvious signs of violence, but the adults around him have no criminal history, no red flags, no reason to be suspected. They see a family tragedy, but the evidence screams murder. The challenge is building a case against someone who appeared to be a trusted family friend, someone who had legitimate access to the child, someone who might not fit the typical predator profile investigators are trained to recognize. But on October 30th, 72 hours after Bre'Yeon's death, the 21-year-old man connected to the case made a decision that would change everything. Nico Cotton turned himself into police. The question was no longer, who did this? It was, how do we prove it? And how do we make sure this never happens again? The investigation that began with a call about an unresponsive child was now a murder case, and justice for Bre'Yeon Wells was just beginning. Nico Cotton was 21 years old, just barely out of adolescence himself. In the Mark Twain neighborhood, he would have appeared as just another young adult, someone the family knew through social connections, someone who seemed safe enough for casual childcare. At 21, he fit perfectly into what child safety experts call the invisible predator category. Too young to raise red flags like an older adult might. Part of the community fabric, not a stranger. Someone who could be described as like family without actually being family. Here's how predators systematically earn family trust. Step 1. They insert themselves into the family's social circle through existing connections. Step 2. They provide helpful services, become reliable, show up consistently. Step 3. They gradually increase their access to the family and children. A 21-year-old who helps with errands, who seems respectful to parents, who expresses interest in the children's activities, this isn't suspicious behavior to most families. This is community engagement. This is how healthy communities function. But predators understand something most parents don't. Communities where trust is high are also communities where access is easy, where people look out for each other. Predators can look like helpful neighbors. Where childcare options are limited, anyone willing to help becomes valuable. Here's the most dangerous trap for families, the close enough connection. Not quite family, not quite a stranger, someone in the gray area that makes parents comfortable but not cautious. When a mother leaves her child with someone she's known for a while but doesn't know deeply, she's operating in a false sense of security. She thinks, I wouldn't leave my child with a complete stranger, but I know this person. The problem is, predators count on this exact thinking. In neighborhoods like Mark Twain, where 30% of children live in poverty and childcare options are limited, parents face impossible choices. The close enough person becomes the default option, not because they're the best choice, but because they're the available choice. The statistics on acquaintance predators are sobering. According to National Center for Missing and Exploited Children data, 90% of child sexual abuse cases involve perpetrators known to the child or family. While we don't have specific murder statistics, the pattern is clear. Predators gain access through trusted relationships. Research shows that most child predators are not the strangers parents warn children about. They're family friends, neighbors, extended family members, someone the child knows and trusts, someone the parents feel comfortable with. The most dangerous predators are those who seem safest, not because they look threatening, but because they've spent time earning trust, building relationships, becoming part of the family's support system. They don't need to break down doors or groom children through online contacts. They've already been invited inside. This is why Bre'Yeon's case follows such a devastating pattern. Not because his mother was careless, but because she operated within the normal bounds of community trust. And that normal, healthy trust was weaponized by someone who understood exactly how to exploit it. When officers received the call shortly after 10:40 p.m. on October 27th in the 4900 block of Thekla, they responded to what appeared to be a medical emergency. An unresponsive 2-year-old boy needed immediate help. EMS rushed Bre'Yeon Wells to the hospital, but despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead that night. But in St. Louis, any child death triggers immediate protocol. The Child Abuse Unit assumed the investigation that very night, following standard procedure for suspicious child deaths. Their first priority: preserve evidence, interview witnesses, establish what happened. October 29th, exactly 48 hours after Bre'Yeon's death, the medical examiner's findings were devastating. Evidence of strangulation, plus other traumatic injuries. This wasn't a medical emergency or accident. This was homicide. The Child Abuse Unit immediately transferred the case to the Homicide Division. Now, detectives were working to determine what led up to Bre'Yeon's injuries and who was responsible. 2 adults who had been with the child were questioned and released pending further investigation, meaning the real investigation was just beginning. This is what makes child homicide investigations so challenging. The adults around the victim might be completely innocent, or they might be the perpetrator. Building a case requires separating truth from trauma, evidence from assumption, and facts from the chaos of a family tragedy. October 30th, 72 hours after Bre'Yeon's death. In a move that would change everything, a 21-year-old man connected to the case made a decision that investigators had been hoping for. Nico Cotton turned himself into police and was taken into custody. This surrender marked the transition from investigation to prosecution. The case was now being reviewed by the Circuit Attorney's Office, moving from who is responsible to how do we prove it. The burden of proof in a homicide case requires evidence that can withstand the highest scrutiny. But here's what investigators face. Building a case against someone who appeared to be a trusted family friend, someone with no criminal history, someone who might have been described as like family. The evidence had to be overwhelming, because the consequences would be life-altering for everyone involved. Detective work in child homicide cases carries a unique psychological burden. When a 2-year-old is murdered, investigators aren't just solving a crime, they're responding to the ultimate failure of every system that was supposed to protect them. With adult victims, you have witnesses, detailed testimony, complex evidence trails. With a 2-year-old victim, you have none of that. Bre'Yeon couldn't tell investigators what happened, couldn't identify his attacker, couldn't explain the events leading to his death. Every piece of evidence had to speak for him. The pressure is immense. The public demands answers. The family needs justice. And investigators know that getting this wrong means either letting a killer walk free or destroying an innocent person's life. The weight of that responsibility falls on detectives who understand that they're the voice for a child who can no longer speak. The Mark Twain neighborhood was processing a trauma that would reshape how residents viewed their community forever. A 2-year-old child had been murdered by someone they might know, in a place that had always felt safe. In working-class communities where 70% of homes are owner-occupied and families have lived for generations, news like this creates a special kind of collective trauma. Not just the horror of a child's death, but the violation of the social fabric that makes neighborhoods function. Residents now understood something investigators have always known. Predators don't announce themselves with warning signs. They earn trust gradually, becoming part of the community fabric. When that trust is weaponized, the entire neighborhood suffers, in fear, isolation, and the loss of social connections that keep communities healthy. Anyone with information about the incident is urged to call the Homicide Division directly at 314-444-5371. Anonymous tips can be submitted to Crime Stoppers at 866-371-TIPS, and only tips that lead to felony arrests are eligible for rewards. Because justice for Bre'Yeon Wells requires a community willing to speak up, even when speaking up means confronting uncomfortable truths about people they thought they knew. Nico Cotton faces a charge of second-degree murder. In Missouri, this isn't a lesser charge. It's one of the most serious crimes in the criminal code. Second-degree murder means knowingly causing another person's death, or causing death while intending to cause serious physical injury. The key word here is knowingly. This isn't about premeditation or planning. It's about understanding that your actions would cause death and choosing to act anyway. With a 2-year-old victim, the prosecution must prove that Cotton understood the vulnerability of his victim and the likely consequences of his actions. If convicted of second-degree murder in Missouri, Cotton faces 10 to 30 years in prison or life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This isn't a charge that the circuit attorney's office brings lightly. It requires substantial evidence, especially when the defendant turned himself in voluntarily, suggesting potential cooperation or a confession. The case is now under review by the circuit attorney's office, and here's why complex cases can't be rushed. Child homicide cases trigger immediate activation of Missouri's Child Fatality Review Panel, a multidisciplinary team of professionals who analyze these tragedies within 24 hours to understand what happened and prevent future deaths. But criminal prosecution operates independently of the review process. The circuit attorney's office must build a case that can withstand the highest scrutiny, cross-examination, evidentiary challenges, and the constitutional standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The review process, which can include analyzing physical evidence, witness statements, and expert testimony, takes time because the consequences are permanent. Sending someone to prison for decades based on incomplete investigation isn't justice, it's a system failure. For victims like Bre'Yeon Wells who cannot advocate for themselves, the justice system must be especially careful to get it right the first time. This is where the justice system's most crucial role comes into focus, representing a victim who cannot speak for himself. Bre'Yeon Wells was 2 years old. He couldn't testify, couldn't identify his attacker, couldn't describe his final moments, couldn't tell a jury what mattered to him in life. The prosecution isn't just proving Cotton's guilt, they're telling Bre'Yeon's story. They're ensuring that a 2-year-old child receives the same justice as any adult victim, even though he can never participate in the process himself. This is why victim impact statements exist, why advocates attend hearings, why investigators carry pictures of the deceased, to humanize victims and make sure they're never forgotten. When someone who cannot advocate for themselves is murdered, the entire burden of representation falls on the justice system, the community, and those who refuse to let the voiceless be forgotten. Every piece of evidence, every witness testimony, every legal argument ultimately serves one purpose, giving Bre'Yeon Wells the justice he was denied in life. October 30th, 2025. A 21-year-old man turned himself in. A circuit attorney's review began. A 2-year-old victim received his first day in court. The justice system moved forward, not because it was fast, but because it was thorough. For victims like Bre'Yeon Wells, who cannot march for justice, who cannot hire attorneys, who cannot speak at press conferences, justice requires something more from all of us. It requires a commitment that no child dies in vain, that no predator escapes accountability, and that the voiceless will always have voices willing to speak for them. This is why we document these cases, why we analyze the evidence, why we understand the psychology of predators, and why we follow the justice process to its conclusion. Because in a world where 2-year-old children can be murdered by those they trust, seeking justice for the voiceless isn't just our mission, it's our responsibility. As of November 8, 2025, the case against Nico Cotton remains under active review by the Circuit Attorney's Office. No court dates have been announced, and the investigation continues. Bre'Yeon Wells' family awaits justice, while the community processes the reality that a trusted 21-year-old man has confessed to murdering a 2-year-old child in their neighborhood. This is where real accountability begins. Not in the courtroom, but in the community's commitment to ensure this never happens again. Here are the warning signs that every community member needs to know. Excessive interest in children that goes beyond normal caring behavior. Uneasy feelings about someone who seems too good with kids. Adults who consistently volunteer for childcare but avoid other community responsibilities. Anyone who isolates children from friends, family, or normal activities. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, document it. Talk to other parents. Contact child welfare organizations before situations become dangerous. The most dangerous predators are those who seem safest, so safety requires active community engagement, not passive trust. In St. Louis, resources exist. Crisis Nursery provides emergency childcare to prevent unsafe situations. The Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-392-3738 operates 24/7 for reporting concerns. Family Court Services offers counseling and support for families in crisis. Community organizations like Parents as Teachers provide home visits and guidance for families who need support. You don't need to investigate alone. These organizations exist to help families before crises occur, to provide safe childcare options, and to intervene when warning signs appear. Bre'Yeon Wells was 2 years old. He liked toys, needed his family, trusted adults to keep him safe. He died because someone who seemed trustworthy wasn't. He cannot speak for himself, cannot demand justice, cannot prevent other children from being hurt, but we can. Every time a community member recognizes warning signs and acts on them, Bre'Yeon's memory lives on in protection. Every time someone volunteers with credible organizations, donates to child safety programs, or simply speaks up about concerns, another child gets a chance at the safety Bre'Yeon was denied. The justice system is pursuing charges. The investigation continues. The circuit attorney's office reviews the evidence. But true accountability requires something more. Communities that refuse to let children die in silence, neighbors who look out for each other, and people who understand that seeking justice for the voiceless is everyone's responsibility. This is True Crime Buff HQ's mission, seeking justice for the most vulnerable, documenting cases that shock us into action, and building communities that protect children because every child deserves to grow up safe. Bre'Yeon Wells deserved better, and we owe it to him to make sure other children get what he was denied.